Hey, how's it going? I'm Ron.
I'm Zach.
We're from Widetrack, and we're here today on Influences, a little episode where we take some of our favorite bands and talk about how they've influenced us as musicians. And today, we're going to talk about Black Sabbath. Zach, you're kind of fairly new to the Black Sabbath camp. What was your first impression, and what were some of the first Black Sabbath tunes that really captured you?
Well, my first impression was, dude, that's awesome, because I was maybe, how old do you think I was?
Oh, that's right, maybe you're not so new, because at 4, I used to play you some Black Sabbath, and yeah, you pretty much went around singing Iron Man, not knowing any of the lyrics, but you knew the melody rather well. And yeah,
I mean, it's the coolest thing ever, and being the coolest thing ever, I sang it everywhere, not knowing the lyrics, also singing the guitars, because
of Tony Iommi.
Exactly, yeah.
So
I think some of the standout tracks would be Iron Man, of course, and then a couple others here and there from when I was younger. None of which I remember as much as I do Iron Man. But coming back to them and listening to them as a more or less more functioning person that can hold memories, I say some of my standout tracks are all of Paranoid, most of Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, a couple here and there from Sabotage, and pretty much a good handful of things before Sabotage.
yeah, that kind of makes me think about my own personal Sabbath thing. Black Sabbath is one of my favorite bands of all time. They have, as much as any band, a ratio of songs per album that I think are great, up to a point. I was reading an interview with Ozzy Osbourne one time. He was talking about after he left Black Sabbath, he said the last 2 Black Sabbath albums I think are just terrible. And I kind of investigated them, and I know that's not a popular opinion with a lot of Black Sabbath fans, but I agree. I could do without those 2 albums. I love the Dio Black Sabbath, but I consider that to be a whole different band. The classic Black Sabbath is, the band that made all the original hits, and that existed between 1970 and, let's just say for those first 5 years, they were invincible. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is one of the great albums of the 70s, in my opinion.
Paranoid as well.
Paranoid is probably the definitive heavy metal album. If you were to really think about what is the number 1 definitive heavy metal album, an argument could be made for maybe something from Metallica or maybe other bands, but Black Sabbath Paranoid is a tough one to beat. That album it's the perfect album. Paranoid, Iron Man, War Pigs, Fairies Wear Boots,
Rat Salad.
I mean, it's just every song on it's great. And even you get into Master of Reality with Sweet Leaf, and Volume 4, Snowblind, and Tomorrow's Dream, and just every album is just chock full of unforgettable hits in the heavy metal and rock genre. As a bass player, you're kind of starting to pick up on some of Geezer Butler's bass lines, and what else stands out to you about Black Sabbath? What is it that just grabs you?
So from the kind of early recordings, the earliest recordings, of course, that was before new recording techniques had been really thought of. So the recording, of course, still isn't too full. It feels kind of shallow, even with the bass. But I realized in place of that, the bass holds a really important part compared to a lot of newer than that, stuff that's out there. What I mean is you can actually hear the bass in that, even though it's so shallow, because of the recording. And even later on in Black Sabbath, after they, of course, caught up with the times and started using these hot new recording techniques, the bass is still very important, and still, it's not put out as a do 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 do
Yeah,
background.
The bass is, yeah, it's almost on equal footing with the guitars. Maybe not quite so much as like a Rush or Chili Peppers, but definitely it's up there, and it really fills out a lot
more
of
so
the
than
sound.
plenty of other things,
Yep.
plenty of other bands.
And the drums of Bill Ward, very jazz influenced. I think it's something that's missing a lot from heavy metal post Black Sabbath era, is the drums got very rigid, but Bill Ward has a very swingy drum style, very off the cuff. You can tell when he was going to do his drums on these recordings, he didn't have his parts all mapped out. He was just kind of going for it, much like a jazz or a blues player would do. And the songs really have an excitement and an immediacy about them, the benefits from that. And Ozzy, he's Ozzy. What classic Ozzy? He gets criticized very much for being an out-of-tune singer, and flat and sharp and all that stuff's true. But Ozzy was very influential. Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, huge Ozzy Black Sabbath fan, huge, and many others. And the thing that Ozzy really brought to the table was like just so much charisma. And a little known fact about Black Sabbath is that Ozzy didn't write the lyrics. It was the bass player, Geezer Butler. And this is one of those things that I think bears mentioning, is Black Sabbath, their image really puts some people off. A lot of people think, well, Black Sabbath, they're so evil and everything.
Satan.
But their lyrics are Flower Child lyrics. I mean, some are like movie oriented. There isn't anything that says go out and kill someone, or I want to stab a person or whatever. But there is a lot of love and come on, let's get it together type lyrics. And there's even a specifically Christian lyric on Master of Reality called After Forever. I would recommend checking it out. I think you'll be quite surprised at what the lyrics to that say. In any case, Black Sabbath is a real influential band to us. Maybe not directly in terms of style, but
more so as, there's a couple things about their image as well. It's not as straightforward as it seems, but there's also no other band that has an image quite like it, even without all the hidden sort of Flower Child, lyrics, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, the kind of darkness was definitely their most popular sort of image, and it hasn't really been replicated by any other band quite as well.
Yeah, as you were saying, with they had really primitive recording technology when they were. But the riffs of Tony Iommi are the most powerful thing about Black Sabbath. I mean, they're just crushing. I mean, it's like, and he's playing with very primitive recording equipment, and bands these days are still trying to get that heavy, and a lot succeed, absolutely, but they're all influenced by Black Sabbath,
One way or another.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things that Tony Iommi once said is Black Sabbath would never have existed without jazz and blues. So it's kind of a lesson to take a page out of the book of someone like that, where, you know, a lot of bands these days are saying, you know, if you were to ask them who you influenced by, and they're basically,
You'd be able to guess.
yeah, you can guess, and they'll say, oh, this band or this band that was out on the radio when I was growing up. But bands like Black Sabbath were really reaching outside their genres and really going to different styles and different, you know, you'd never think, like Tony Iommi, who was very influenced by Django Reinhardt, an old 1930s acoustic flamenco guitar player. And all these things kind of, speaking of influences, they have an influence, and they develop that originality. I think that's one of the things that a band like Black Sabbath really possesses.
Especially being the founders of heavy metal.
Yeah, I think that's...
You know, you kind of think of, oh, this heavy metal band was influenced by this heavy metal band, who was influenced by these heavy metal bands, who were influenced by Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you think about it, who was Black Sabbath influenced by, it would not be easy to figure out, because sort of what makes them so unique and powerful and different in themselves and Black Sabbathy is you cannot tell where all of their influences have come from.
There's an old saying that says originality is merely hiding one's source. And that is so true. I mean, the Black Sabbath, who influenced Black Sabbath? Well, you know that they have influences, but they're not easy to detect. A lot of bands, it's very easy to tell who influenced them, and as a result, it makes some music a bit more generic, and some people dig that, you know. Hey,
predictability isn't always a bad thing.
Right, but for us, we're trying to dig deeper and stretch beyond, yeah. So Black Sabbath is definitely an influence in that regard. So anyhow, we're kind of coming up on some serious time here, but I want to thank you guys for checking these out. We're still, you know, just kind of keeping it loose and just having these conversations. I thought it would be a really cool idea to bridge the generations here with, you know, as Zach and some of his friends talk about the music that I grew up on, and they're also throwing some newer stuff my way that there's this exchange of appreciation, and I think it's really bridging the gap here, and hopefully helping both generations have a little bit more wider range. So in any case, we got some cool news coming up soon about our new album, and we will keep you posted, but in the meantime, keep on rocking.